Hello, alright, welcome to another reading. Thanks for clicking on this video, thanks for your interest in literature, and thanks for being here. Alright, so I'm not going to talk too much before this because I could easily just ramble about things that nobody cares about. So I'm just going to give a quick introduction to today's, right now's reading. This is not necessarily a short story, but in a way it is. I guess you could call it a vignette. It's basically a chapter from this novel, The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. Ray Bradbury was a science fiction author, and he might still be alive. I'm not quite sure. This novel is phenomenal. It's basically written that each chapter follows different characters, a different plot, but a different plot point along the same plot line. And so not necessarily just one point of rising action and one climax and one falling action. There's kind of that, there's a whole plot line for each chapter, and each chapter plays a role in the bigger plot line that is the whole book. The book was first published in 1950 and has since been published quite a few different times, different editions. When I bought this book, I did not notice, but on the front cover, it has a high school stamp and checkout and all of that, this leads me to believe that from the information there leads me to believe this book was studied in a high school, which makes so much sense because there are a ton of different themes packed into this novel, from family, domestic, how should I say, topics, to conservation, to segregation, to the class system in general. A lot of different, there's probably a couple more that I haven't read it since last summer. I just kind of picked through a couple of chapters and chose one that I really liked. Now, my favorite chapter is just too long to do this video on, but so let me give a little, again, I've rambled too much here, so let me give a little bit of context to the story so far, like the littlest bit, and then I'll read this chapter from the book. And I cannot suggest this book highly enough. It's fantastic. It actually took me quite a few trips to the half-price bookstore to find this book. It was not just one of those super common. Certain books are mass produced, but certain books are at half-price books. They're like To Kill a Mockingbird. They read that in schools, and so a lot of kids might buy the book for school, not want it anymore. Then they get rid of it. It goes to half-price books or whatever. So they have a lot of copies of a few books. This was not one of them. I was very excited when I found this. They had two copies, so I bought both, but I currently only have one. I gave one away. So anyways, context to the story. And actually, Ray Bradbury was he was raised in Illinois. He lived in Illinois for a part of his childhood. So context to where we're at in the story with what I'm about to read. this story follows a line of basically it starts on Mars with some Martians, and then each chapter slowly integrates more and more human elements and human characters. Even there's astronauts and spacemen that come and travel, and then at a certain point in the novel, it kind of reaches a peak where it's even. There's an even amount of Martian, not necessarily like stated even amount, but amount of Martians and humans, and then the planet. So Mars is, relatively, but then it becomes more balanced. The humans have more control than the Martians. I'm saying this very vaguely because there's a lot to go. I'm not going to go into it. I just really cannot encourage this book enough. A lot of cool space travel. So anyways, one very important detail to note is that the Martians, as stated in the first chapter, are oxygen is poisonous to the Martians. So they don't think Earth can be inhabitable. Their scientists say it's not possible because there's too much oxygen. That's one important note. But at this point in the story, humans have invaded Mars and established settlements and are studying the planet. There are still Martians. There's so much good stuff that happens in the book before this and also after this. Personally, again, my favorite part comes before this, what I'm reading here right now. So I cannot recommend this enough. Okay, I'm going to start. So we've got our novel. I've got my drink of choice, a little coffee. And I've got the AirPod in for hopefully the best audio quality. And I have my Spider-Man shirt on for the good vibes. All right, let's get started. So what we're reading today is, well, it'll be chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It would be chapter 9. We're reading chapter 9 of The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. Phenomenal book. I do not own any part of this. I don't know what the copyright is on this by means of reading one chapter as an established story. However, I've seen chapters of this published individually in various places previously, so I think it's okay. All right, well, chapter 9, each chapter takes place in a different month of a different year, starting in January of 1999, and it starts on Mars with Martians. The chapter we are reading takes place in December of 2001, and the last chapter, the final chapter, ends in October 2026, so in the future, technically, but this book was written in the 50s. There are various, things were socially different in the 50s, and that's what this touches upon. This book is written to acknowledge those things, but this chapter specifically, does not as heavily deal with those themes as others. But this chapter is, I believe, not only very entertaining, but also, you can find meaning in anything you read. This absolutely has a lot. I don't want to say too much because that's not for me to tell the viewer, which is you, what that is. All right, so thank you very much. Here we go. December 2001, the green morning. When the sun set, he crouched by the path and cooked a small supper and listened to the fire crack, while he put the food in his mouth and chewed thoughtfully. It had been a day not unlike 30 others, with many neat holes dug in the dawn hours, seeds dropped in, and water brought from the bright canals. Now, with an iron weariness in his slight body, he lay and watched the sky color from one darkness to another. His name was Benjamin Driscoll, and he was 31 years old. And the thing that he wanted was Mars grown green and tall with trees and foliage, producing air, more air, growing larger with each season, trees to cool the towns in the boiling summer, trees to hold back the winter winds. There were so many things a tree could do: add color, provide shade, drop fruit, or become a children's playground, a whole sky universe to climb and hang from. An architecture of food and pleasure that was a tree. But most of all, the trees would distill an icy air from the lungs and the gentle rustling for the ear when you lay nights in your snowy bed and were gentled to sleep by the sound. He lay listening to the dark earth gathering itself, waiting for the sun, for the rains that hadn't come yet. His ear to the ground, he could hear the feet of the years ahead moving at a distance, and he imagined the seeds he had placed today sprouting up with green, and taking hold on the sky, pushing out branch after branch, until Mars was an afternoon forest. Mars was a shining orchard. In the early morning, with the small sun lifting faintly among the folded hills, he would be up and finished with a smoky breakfast in a few minutes, and trotting out the fire ashes, be on his way with knapsacks, testing, digging, placing seed or sprout, tamping lightly, watering, going on, whistling, looking at the clear sky brightening toward a warm noon. "You need the air," he told his night fire. The fire was a ruddy, lively companion that snapped back at you, that slept close by with drowsy pink eyes, warm through the chilly night. We all need the air. It's the thin air here on Mars. You get tired so soon. It's like living in the Andes in South America. High. You inhale and you don't get anything. It doesn't satisfy. He felt his rib case. In 30 days, how it had grown. To take in more air, they all had to build their lungs. They have to build more lungs or plant more trees. "That's what I'm here for," he said. The fire popped. In school, they told a story about Johnny Appleseed walking across America planting apple trees. Well, I'm doing more. I'm planting oaks, elms, and maples, every kind of tree, aspens and dead deodars and chestnuts. Instead of making just fruit for the stomach, I'm making air for the lungs. When those trees grow up some year, think of the oxygen they'll make. He remembered his arrival on Mars. Like 1,000 others, he had gazed out upon a still morning and thought, how do I fit here? What will I do? Is there a job for me? Then he had fainted. Someone pushed a vial of ammonia to his nose, and coughing, he came around. "You'll be all right," said the doctor. "What happened?" "The air's pretty thin. Some can't take it. I think you'll have to go back to Earth." "No!" He sat up and almost immediately felt his eyes darken, and Mars revolved twice around under him. His nostrils dilated, and he forced his lungs to drink in deep nothingness. "I'll be all right. I've got to stay here." They let him lie, gasping in horrid fish-like motions, and he thought, air, air, air. They're sending me back because of air. And he turned his head to look across the Martian fields and hills. He brought them to focus, and the first thing he noticed was that there were no trees at all, as far as you could look in any direction. The land was down upon itself, a land of black loam, but nothing on it, not even grass. Air, he thought, the thin stuff whistling in his nostrils. Air, air. And on top of hills, or in the shadows, or even by little creeks, not a tree and not a single green blade of grass. Of course! He felt the answer came not from his mind, but his lungs and his throat. And the thought was like a sudden gust of pure oxygen raising him up, trees and grass. He looked down at his hands and turned them over. He would plant trees and grass. That would be his job. to fight against the very thing that might prevent his staying here. He would have a private horticulture war with Mars. There lay the old soil and the plants of it, so ancient that they had worn themselves out. But what if new forms were introduced? Earth trees, great mimosas, and weeping willows and magnolias and magnificent eucalyptus. What then? There's no guessing what mineral wealth hid in the soil, untapped because of old ferns, flowers, bushes, and trees had tired themselves to death. "Let me up," he shouted. "I've got to see the coordinator." He and the coordinator had talked an entire morning about things that grew and were green. It would be months, if not years, before organizing planting began. So far, frosted food was brought from Earth in flying icicles. A few community gardeners were greening up in hydroponic plants. "Meanwhile," said the coordinator, "it's your job. We'll get what seed we can for you. A little equipment. Space on the rockets is mighty precious now, I'm afraid. Since these first towns are mining communities, there won't be much sympathy for your tree planting. But you'll let me do it?" They let him do it, provided with a single motorcycle, its bin full of rich seeds and sprouting. He had parked his vehicle in the valley's wilderness and struck out on foot over the land. That had been 30 days ago, and he had never glanced back. For looking back would have been sickening to the heart. The weather was excessively dry. It was doubtful if any seeds had sprouted yet. Perhaps his entire campaign, his 4 weeks of bending and scooping, were lost. He kept his eyes only ahead of him, going on down this wide, shallow valley under the sun, away from First Town. It's the name of the place he came from. The first town on Mars was First Town, is the name. Waiting for the rains to come. Clouds were gathering over the dry mountains now as he drew his blanket over his shoulders. Mars was a place as unpredictable as time. He felt the baked hills simmering down into frosty night, and he thought of the rich, inky soil, a soil so black and shiny it almost crawled and stirred in your fist, a rank soil from which might sprout gigantic beanstalks, from which, with bone-shaking concussion, might drop screaming giants. Un momento, por favor. Alright, here we go. The fire fluttered into sleepy ash. The air tremored to the distant roll of a cartwheel. Thunder. A sudden odor of water. Tonight, he thought, and put his hand out to feel for rain. Tonight. He awoke to a tap on his brow. Water ran down his nose and to his lips. Another drop hit his eye, blurring it. Another splashed his chin. The rain. Gentle, raw, and easy. It mizzled out of the high air. A special elixir, tasting of spells and stars and air, carrying a peppery dust in it, and moving like a rare light sherry on his tongue. Rain. He sat up. He let the blanket fall in his blue denim shirt spot while the rain took on some more solid drops. The fire looked as though an invisible animal were dancing on it, crushing it until it was angry smoke. The rain fell. The great black lid of sky cracked in 6 powdery blue chips like a marvelous crackled glaze and rushed down. He saw 10 billion rain crystals hesitating long enough to be photographed by the electrical display. Then darkness and water. He was drenched to the skin, but he held his face up and let the water hit his eyelids, laughing. He clapped his hands together and stepped up and walked around to his little camp, and it was 1 o'clock in the morning. It rained steadily for 2 hours and then stopped. The stars came out, freshly washed and clearer than ever. Changing into dry clothes from his cellophane pack, Mr. Benjamin Driscoll lay down and went happily to sleep. The sun rose slowly among the hills. It broke out upon the land quietly and wakened Mr. Driscoll where he lay. He waited a moment before rising. He had worked and waited a long, hot month, and now, standing up, he He turned at last and faced the direction from which he had come. It was a green morning. As far as he could see, the trees were standing up against the sky. Not one tree, not two, not a dozen, but thousands. He had planted in seed and sprout. And not little trees, no. Not saplings, not little tender shoots, but great big trees, huge trees. Trees as tall as 10 men, green and huge and round and full, trees shimmering their metallic leaves, trees whispering, trees in a line over the hills, lemon trees, lime trees, redwoods, ash, apple, orange, eucalyptus, stung by a tumultuous rain, nourished by magical soil, and even as he watched, throwing out new branches, popping open new buds. He's watching these trees sprout in real time, at the moment. "Impossible," cried Benjamin Driscoll. But the valley and the morning were green, and the air all about, like a moving current, a mountain river, came the new air, the oxygen blowing from the green trees. You could see it shimmer high in crystal billows. Oxygen, fresh, pure, green, cold oxygen turning the valley into a river delta. In a moment, the town doors would flip wide. People would run out through the new miracle of oxygen, sniffing, gusting in lungfuls of it, cheeks pinking with it, noses frozen with it, lungs revivified, hearts leaping, and worn bodies lifted into a dance. Mr. Benjamin Driscoll took one long, deep drink of green water air and fainted. Before he woke again, 5,000 new trees had climbed up into the yellow sun. That's the end of the chapter, but I'd like to read one more the next chapter. It's just a very short section. All right, so Benjamin Driscoll just grew all these trees. Trees are good for us, right? Oxygen. He needed oxygen. He had a problem. He solved it. He was a hero to his community, right? His community. All right. This next section is February 2002. It takes place February 2002, and it's titled The Locusts. The rockets set the bony meadows afire, turned rock to lava, turned wood to charcoal, transmitted water to steam, made sand and silica into green glass, which lay like shattered mirrors, reflecting the invasion all about. The rockets came like drums beating in the night. The rockets came like locusts swarming and settling in blooms of rosy smoke. And from the rockets ran men with hammers in their hands to beat the strange world into a shape that was familiar to the eye, to bludgeon away all the strangeness, their mouths fringed with nails so that they resembled steel-toothed carnivores, spitting them into their swift hands as they hammered up frame cottages and scuttled over roofs with shingles to blot out the eerie stars and fit green shades to pull against the night. And when the carpenters had hurried on, the women came in with flower pots and chintz and pans and set up kitchen clamor to cover the silence. Damar's maid waiting outside the door in the shaded window. In 6 months, a dozen small towns had been laid down upon the naked planet, filled with sizzling neon tubes and yellow electric bulbs. In all, some 90,000 people came to Mars, and more on Earth were packing their grips. The Martian Chronicles.